Religious freedom is a great gift, but it did not come easily. It came through the blood, toil, sweat, and tears of many Christians through the centuries. One such group of believers was the Pilgrims, who settled in New England in 1620. They were one particular congregation of separatists. That is, they wanted to separate from the Church of England for conscience sake, but King James wouldn't let them. So, as their great chronicler William Bradford writes, they decided to uproot and leave their homeland so they could worship Christ in peace.
After a few years of anxiety of secret worship, of double church attendance, both in the Church of England so they wouldn't get punished, and then in their own secret congregational meetings, they decided to leave their country. In Holland, they reasoned, at least they would be tolerated. Their first attempt to leave ended in disaster. The ship captain they hired betrayed them and stole their possessions. Many of them ended up in jail. Their second attempt was also disastrous. On May 12, 1608, at the port of Hull on the east coast of England, a group of about 80 of them, men, women, and children, were on board a coal boat called Francis. The 80 passengers were attempting to flee the only country they ever knew, England, in order to find sanctuary in Holland. But they did not have an official license to travel.
Well, the separatists wanted to leave England. And in a sense, James I would have been glad to get rid of them, but the problem was, if you were considered a nonconformist, if you weren't conforming to the rules of the Church of England and the hierarchy under the king, then you weren't allowed to leave the country. So they were really caught between the rock and the hard place.
The coal barge, or bark as it was called, was able to carry the passengers out to sea where they could be transferred to a Dutch ship. Suddenly, the king's armed soldiers came to arrest them. By this time,
the poor men already aboard were in great distress for their wives and children left thus to be captured and destitute of help. And for themselves too, without any clothes but what they had on their backs, and scarcely a penny about them, all their possessions being aboard the bark, now seized. What weeping and crying on every side. William Bradford.
The authorities kept the women and children they captured in jail for a long time, but it grew to be an embarrassment because their behavior was so remarkable and their attitude was so good. Well, the men made their way back, and the women and children went home, but they tried again. They were not going to give up.
Eventually, they made it over to Holland and within a year settled in the town of Leiden. There they spent many good years.
Being thus settled, after many difficulties, they continued many years in a comfortable condition, enjoying much sweet and delightful society and spiritual comfort in the ways of God. William Bradford.
But after about a decade, they became restless. The hard work, the extra hours, the poor jobs, working in a second language, all of this took its toll. But the worst problem was that some of their children were enticed by the worldly Dutch youth and were leaving the church.
Another concern for the Pilgrims was that the Treaty of Peace between Spain and Holland was going to expire. What this could mean is that they would lose their religious toleration because Spain could reinvade Holland as it had earlier.
When the Pilgrims were in Holland for more than 12 years, they realized several things. Actually, the year 1617 was their year of decision. When that time, they realized the truce with Spain was going to end in 1620. Secondarily, they realized that they were getting older. Their children were not walking in their ways the way they wanted to. The temptations of a freer Dutch society were such that they didn't like that.
And so they began to consider another move, this time to the New World, to America.
It was no small decision to decide to go to America. America was this mysterious, dangerous place, a place of three-headed snakes, a place they had heard of unicorns, a place where there were saber-toothed tigers, where there were cannibals. Those were the stories that were coming back from the early explorers in America. And so it was a very fearful place, and it was a very difficult decision to decide that you're going to take your wife and your children and you're going to expose everyone to those kind of dangers in America. But the the great desire to have this freedom of faith drove them to do that. And so when they finally made the decision where to go, they decided they would go to wilderness America.
We have no idea how much Christians in previous generations sacrificed virtually everything for the sake of living out their faith as they understood the Bible. The Pilgrims provide a model for the ages. That is, to put our faith in Jesus and our love for Him first and foremost in our lives. Since the Pilgrims were one particular congregation that moved from mid-England to Holland, and then from Holland eventually to America, and since they cast a long and positive shadow on what would become the United States of America, Dr. D. James Kennedy once noted that America essentially began as a church relocation project. For Providence Forum, I'm Jerry Newcombe.